Welcome to Hey, Look at My Thing. I'm Aaron Irons, and I'm joined today by two lovely, let's call them assistants today, because it's my show today, and I'll let them introduce themselves.
Hi, I'm Keegan Reynolds.
And I'm Rachel Bennett.
Thank you for joining me today. In this episode, we're going to be talking about Harry Potter and the Sacred Text. It is a podcast that is directed toward Harry Potter fans. And have you guys heard of this podcast before?
I have never heard of it before. I mean, obviously, I've heard of Harry Potter and I've read all the books and I've seen every movie but the last one just
You weren't missing
I didn't
much.
want to.
Holy shit.
It's just like I got through 7 of them. Like, you know what? I remember what happened. I think I'm good. But no, I've never heard of this particular podcast.
All right, Rachel.
Similarly, I've never heard of this podcast. I am a human being of a certain age and come from a big family of readers. So I, of course, read all the Harry Potter books, kind of like, not as they were coming out, although by the later ones, I had like joined in so that I was like on launch days. My family was super into it, but none of us were like, there's like 3 sorts of Harry Potter people, I think. There's like people who are very, very, very like extremely into Harry Potter and they know all the like lore that sort of evolved outside of the main 7 books. And there's like a lot of like side supplements and they did like versions of the textbooks that Harry has. And some people have like read all of those and whatever. Like that is one type. And then there's a type who's like, oh yeah, I really like that. Like I read it and I enjoy the media around it. And I think that the things that are kind of attached with it are cute and fun. And I like know what house I'm sorted into. And that's basically like everything, right? And then there's people who are like, seriously, what the fuck is this? And I think I fall into that like middle camp where I'm like, I'm totally a Ravenclaw. I'm about it. But I never got like super hard into Harry Potter as like my sort of like thing that I looped or cycled through like, oh, I must have this media all the time because I did that with Buffy.
Yeah. Oh, what is it? What is this, Buffy the Vampire Slayer? Have we ever mentioned this before?
Just wanted to get it in early, but like that's what took that place as media for me. But I'm so hyped for this because like just on the name alone, it seems like it's going to combine whack Bible things with Harry Potter, and I'm so about it. I'm very here for this. I'm very excited.
So you kind of hit the nail on the head there, Rachel. I'll let Keegan throw in his last 2 cents before I get into the description of what you're actually in for.
Well, for me, like Harry Potter is almost an audio medium because after I read it the initial time, when I reread it, I listened to the audiobooks like 2 times, and I actually preferred that. So
I can see that.
So in my head, like Harry Potter is almost an audio thing, so this kind of fits for me.
Yeah,
this might actually be better for you, Keegan, since this is like also in that format. Like the closest I got to audio was we like read some of the early books out loud to the kiddo, because 10, you're still doing bedtime stories. And so like I have done the audio version of it, but you don't really like listen to yourself when you read out loud. So that's a little bit of a disconnect for me. It might work better for you.
Yeah. So this podcast, it's going to be a little weird because in the first episode, they don't really give a lot away about themselves. So I'm going to kind of spoil the characters. And when I say characters, I mean actually the real people who do this podcast. Because they are very interesting people. It's just that you don't get to know them quite as well until much later. And we don't have all the time to get to it. Yeah. But the backstory for these 2 people is they met in divinity school. So they are parishioners, or I don't know what's the correct word, but they're men of cloth or women of cloth.
They're like part of a clergy, right?
Yes.
Okay.
But they're both atheists, and they decided to read Harry Potter as if it were the Bible and to have sermons based off of the Harry Potter, like the different themes that they can come up with. Yeah.
Oh my god, I could not be more about this. What the fuck?
Right?
How has this existed and I didn't? This is like literary interpretation plus like biblical scholarship plus Harry Potter. I'm so horny for this one. Okay, sorry, continue.
Yes. So they'll be like, let's talk about the theme of mercy and let's read chapter 3 and read through the theme of mercy and how can we be more merciful to our neighbors today? And just like it's so thoughtful, and it's a very different way of looking at religion, and from kind of the back door. Really, we don't have a religion. We don't buy into any sort of organized religion, but there are things to take away from faith study, and that organized practice of reading something and digging really deep into it and doing these faith practices of one of the things they do is Lexicon Divina, I think it's called, where they'll read it and they'll do like a 4-step process of interpreting. And I think they do that maybe in the first episode, but they do it quite often. And so one of them is traditionally Christian and the other is traditionally Jewish. So they were raised that way, but they later discovered they're like, I don't really believe there's any realness to this. So I'm a self-declared atheist, but I know enough about these religious practices to be comfortable doing them. And they'll bring in special guests occasionally from like Hindu faith or something, and they'll do their practices for them, but they never really do those on their own. They don't really feel comfortable going off and doing that practice without having someone guiding them through it. But they're very comfortable doing like Havruta, which is, I think, a Jewish practice, and just other things between the two of them. They go back and forth quite a bit. There's an episode per chapter, and they're on book 7 now. So you can imagine there's a lot of episodes, and they're like 20 to 30 minutes each. So there's a lot of content. Yeah, it's not huge, but it's pretty much follows the practice of, hey, let's read the chapter. We'll give you a little bit of a recap. Let's discuss it through the theme. And then they do like their religious practice. And it's just, depending on the chapter, depending on what's going on in their lives, they're just really thoughtful and interesting people, and they have a lot to share.
Sounds great.
I'm delighted and excited. What a beautiful activity for our Sunday. Let's all go to church together.
With that said, I will see you guys on the other side.
So it's very possible that we will never have sponsors, but you can bet I'm going to keep on doing this bit. This week we spent a lot of time talking about values, but also about Harry Potter. Harry Potter was intended for young people, but it's connected so much with so many people, which is why it hurts that the author of this story that so many of us loved and connected to has such regressive views on so many things. She's been especially vocal about people who are trans, and her beliefs about them are bullshit. There's no other way around it. I know this is a bad time for everyone, but if you have any extra cash flow right now, please remember that there are many LGBTQ teens who have been trapped for months with people who are not supportive of who they are, and think about how incredibly difficult that must be for them. With that in mind, I would ask you to consider donating to the Trevor Project this week. They provide aid to LGBTQ teens. They have an A rating from Charity Watch and have helped hundreds of thousands of young people in crisis with a truly robust series of mental health services. And if you don't have money this week, don't worry about it. Keep loving yourself and the people around you, and we'll love you too.
And we're back. We just finished listening to Harry Potter and the Sacred Texts, Season 1, Episode 1, as it were. What did you guys think? What were your first impressions?
I was immediately soothed by the voices.
Oh my God.
You could tell that they are used to speaking in public and speaking to people and like arranging their thoughts for speech. They're very polished, they're very smooth, and it was really like nice just to listen to. Like just the sensation of listening to them was enjoyable.
So I I came from a really complex place on this, which I'm happy to go into later. But I actually had the same first note, especially Casper's like very sweet, very calm British accent. I was like, ah, yes.
Yeah.
It's like lowering yourself into a warm bath. Where you're like, ah. Yeah, I actually I sort of got kind of misty at the end. I had up until this year worked in a Catholic school, and sort of the move from that Catholic school to the place where I am working now has been a little bit tumultuous in spots. And I did not realize how much, I'm not like a churchgoer, but I did not realize how much I missed that like kind of connection, even if it wasn't ever like me, right? I'm not Catholic. So being at that Catholic school, there was always a bit of a disconnect. I really missed the like authenticity that my colleagues especially brought in prayer and in blessing, and the sort of like altruistic place that those actions come from is very wholesome. And it gave me a lot of sort of like faith in humanity and bolstered my spirit in a way that I like don't think is necessarily a religious experience for me, but did do something for me on like a human level. And so at the end, when they were like talking about their blessings and how it's kind of a lost art, I got a little bit misty. I'm not going to lie.
Yeah, I have to say, building off of that, I always came from a background like everyone around you is Christian. And then, you know, I discovered pretty early in life that I belonged to the LGBT group of people, and it was kind of wrestling with that, and then hearing, you know, treat your neighbor with goodwill, but also you can't be gay, or you know, you're going to be going to hell. Like those two things were just such a disconnect to me that it pushed me away from religion entirely. And it was listening to this podcast, and certainly before it to some degree, but this definitely helped push me in that direction, is that you can have both. You can have that altruism and that connectivity, but you don't need to actually just go through a religious way. And it doesn't mean that just because someone is Christian that they aren't a good person because they have negative views toward me. It's not all or nothing. There's a lot of gray area.
Yeah, I like how they talked about tools, and when you say like this religion is just useless or this religion is useless, they have developed over a long period of time incredible tools for insightfulness, for altruism, for self-improvement that you can use even if you don't subscribe to their religious beliefs. I mean, those tools are not useless. Those tools are not bad just because maybe parts of what they think you don't like. You can still use those good things.
Yeah.
I really, really appreciated Casper at the beginning talking about his journey, saying that he had all of this like religious education, but it never felt like that text belonged to him, which I am totally about. Like, I grew up in the Midwest, and like my mom came from a background where like her family at one point had been Jewish, and some of the like traditions of that kind of carried forward, but for the most part it wasn't really something we celebrated. And I went to a lot of like youth groups, like Christian various denomination youth groups and Bible camps and all that kind of thing all throughout my childhood, because I grew up in the Midwest. But if you're looking specifically at the Old Testament, which are the stories I knew best because I had sort of more of that Jewish tradition in my background, there is not a lot of place there to look for a God that is comforting. There's a lot of space there to look for a God who turns people into pillars of salt. And if that's your thing, or if you're like, oh man, he is really pissed and he's just going to like wipe everybody out, if that's like the thing that you need, it's totally there. And obviously it's more nuanced than that. And obviously there's a lot more going on than that. But like, I didn't have that education. So him saying like this text never felt like it belonged to me struck such like a deep place in my heart. Like, yeah, no, absolutely. It it doesn't connect for me in a way that's personal. And I get why Harry Potter would fill that void. Like, it's much more comforting. It's much sort of an easier place for especially kids to get access and kind of understand what's happening on that like intuitive level, because the characters are them instead of going through 4 chapters listing the lineage of people. This person was 600 years old, and like that doesn't connect to kids. They're 8. Like, they have no conception of 600 years. But they can totally connect to like a nervous 10-year-old who feels like kind of an outsider, and they can totally connect to that feeling of like feeling like a chosen one, because every kid is the star of their own narrative, right? Every person, really.
Yeah.
Just get better at sort of like meeting that out as we get older and realizing like, oh, other people have their own stories. Kids don't have that. It's just them. So like, it makes perfect sense that there's this chosen one. And that's like, it speaks to them because they feel like a chosen one because nobody else has thoughts because they're having thoughts. Like, yeah, I just really, really liked the angle that they came at this from. Like, this is a text that's meaningful to us, so we're going to treat it in the way that we treat meaningful texts, and ignoring everything else that is like the context to that. Like, this is a children's book and it's 2 decades old, and like ignoring all of that and taking it with authentic love is a really interesting way, a very cool way to come at it.
Yeah. Bouncing back to like the toolbox, I really like the idea of practicing values. And that is something that has really stuck with me. And it's probably the thing I got out of this the most, is to just take some time and think about the things that I want to do or want to be, and really take the time and say, like, if I wanted to be a better person, how do I need to behave? And really connecting with that thought, and then saying like, then I have to be committed to doing this all the time, or being one of the things that I've done, maybe not related to this, is to be more accountable. And I cannot stress enough just how important it is to like everyone around you to like show up, be there, and to do what you say you'll do. This is kind of a work thing that got me there, but it really nailed it down when I was listening to this podcast to say like, that is something I want to be committed to more than anything else. That if I say I'm going to be there, I want to be there for you. And I want you to know that I'm going to be there for you. And so every time I listen to this, I reaffirm my commitments to those types of things because it's important.
I thought it was interesting that they both chose to recommit to things too. Like when they were talking about like, what commitments are we going to make? They both chose to say like, this is something that I'm already doing, but it's important. And I know that it's important. So I'm going to recommit myself to that. I'm going to like come at that with a new kind of like rigor or a new fervor or more appreciation or more authenticity. I thought it was interesting that they both chose that.
They both talk about. Oh, sorry.
No. Go ahead.
They both talk kind of about being like present and mindful and just like understanding why you're doing stuff. And I really enjoyed how thoughtful they're trying to live their lives. It's like, when I'm doing something, it has a purpose. You know, I'm not just like kind of going on autopilot. It's like, why am I doing this? I'm doing this because of this. This is important because of this. I really do find that to be incredibly helpful.
Yeah. And bouncing off of Rachel's point about recommitting versus committing, I think it kind of depends on where you are on the journey. Like, if you're coming into Harry Potter and the sacred text and you've never really dug deep and you've never really had that self-reflecting point where you think that you're the star of the show and everything revolves around you and why do bad things happen to me, I think that's a point where you need to commit to, I need to be more thoughtful of others. You need to commit to something new, something outside of your space of comfort.
Right.
But if you come from a place where you've really dug deep before and you keep, getting more into that, like if you commit to 7,000 different things, you're not going to be very good at any of them. You have to commit to the things that are important to you. So recommitting is really being mindful of that.
I appreciated that they talked, I think it was Vanessa That's her name, right?
Vanessa Zoltan and Casper ter Kuile.
I think it was Vanessa who was talking about how Hagrid is almost like a cautionary tale about the danger of being overcommitted. I think that committed but not overcommitted is a really, really fine line.
Yeah.
Because there's a certain amount of like beauty and power in those like gray zones, right? Where like if I commit to an idea or I commit to a thing, there's a very real possibility that from an objective or even subjective perspective, I'm wrong.
Yeah.
It happens all the time. We see and we interact and we talk with people with whom we disagree. And sometimes through talking, if you're open to it, you realize like, oh, maybe I need to move toward the middle, or maybe I'm a little bit wrong on this. For me, the more I'm in that gray zone, the more kind of like anxious I feel, the more sort of like unsteady or uncertain I feel. But also I'm more confident in my ability to be sort of a well-rounded person and somebody who like approaches other people with empathy. So it's interesting to me to like focus so much on commitment and then be able to pull back and say like, but also there's danger in leaning too hard into something if you haven't really explored it yet. Because there is, like, she even talked about, I'm committing to knowing that I'll never know if my choice is right. And I need to, like, roll with what I've got, and I'm never going to know if it's the right answer. And that process itself is kind of an interesting journey to go down.
Yeah, I really enjoyed just hearing them talk to each other. They obviously are friends, and they're very playful with each other when they're talking about the drills. And it's obvious that they love words. They love expressing themselves. They're obviously perceptive people. And I really liked how they have decided that using any sort of significant text, significant to themselves or to whoever's reading it, for introspection can be a useful thing. It doesn't have to be this one thing. It doesn't have to be one thing that you can use to learn more about yourself. They're using Harry Potter to become better people. And it's just, like maybe, if you don't like Harry Potter or if it's not your thing, that part of it's not going to be helpful for you. But you can use the tools they're giving you with a text that you choose yourself that's significant and still get something out of this. You don't have to be a Harry Potter fan for this to be a good thing for you. I mean, obviously it makes it more enjoyable. It makes it, it connects with you more, but it's not like a necessity.
I also, so coming back to that, like tools in a toolbox and that, Keegan, about like the things that they're doing, the way that they're like processing through the text being useful, to like pull back from kind of the like religious aspect of it, which obviously is a huge aspect and it's sort of where they both come from. The way that they like delve into this as a work of literature is so just chef kiss. It's so good. Like they just talk fucking literary to me, my dude. They start going line by line, and I was like full boner. And delving into allegory, like anyway. So the way that they approach literature, right? It's really, really smart and very fascinating to me because it's not something that's a part of, at least wasn't a part of my formal training as far as dissecting literature, is that they choose a theme first. And that's fascinating because if you look at critical scholarship for literature in general, there's a lot of formalized lenses. You might have like a feminist lens, it might be Marxist, it might be historical, it might be reader response, which is like generally what we're doing in high school, where it's just kind of like based on your own life experiences and your own feelings about the thing and the connections that you can make. Or if you're an asshole, it might be deconstruction, and you can put both thumbs in your butt and just kind of wiggle them around and say whatever the fuck you want to. Somebody's going to get mad at me about that. I can feel the future hate mail coming. But this idea of reading for a theme, the second they said they were going to do it, I was like, oh yeah, they do that all the time in literature, right? You show up to your mass or whatever it is, and there's your person, your spiritual leader, who will give some kind of talk that is generally focused on a specific theme. And it might come back to something that happened in their life or a parishioner's life or in the news or whatever. reading for a theme like that, approaching a passage with a theme in mind, is really common in literature, and we don't do it very much in literature. And I'm totally going to steal that and put it in my English teacher pockets.
Yes.
It's such a good way to like
Yeah.
drive discussion for a whole class novel, which tends to be a complete fucking slog, right? But if you're looking at like a whole class novel, saying like, okay, guys, this week we're going to read through this and just look for like how power dynamics happen, or how oppression happens, or how love is presented. Like there's so many different tacks that you can take to get them thinking about those themes. And I just, I wish we were in school. My kids would be doing this tomorrow.
Yeah.
I'm very, very, very excited about that as like a thing that I can keep in my back pocket as a way for me personally to dive into literature more meaningfully, and also a way for me to push my kids to dive into literature more meaningfully. Just what a gift.
Yeah, I don't come from a very strong English background. You know, that my education is more math and science and deeper math with some sciencey math on top of the math.
Yes, we call those the dark arts.
So it is very interesting and educational to me to kind of approach that, because you're using a lot of terminology that I'm not super familiar with, but just like grays on the surface. Mm-hmm. And it helps me approach this a little bit differently in the different ways they could have explored this, because I'm not really well versed. So they say, we're going to read it through this lens and this theme. And I say, yes, that sounds great. Let's do that.
Right. It's interesting because like from a formal literary training standpoint, right? Harry Potter doesn't hold up super well. Like if you dissect it through a lot of lenses, it's problematic in a lot of ways. And so the fact that they came at this and they were like, we're going to approach this with love. We're going to approach this with integrity. We're going to assume that it has good things to say to us about how we need to live our lives because we love it and we connected with it. And that must mean something, is one, completely valid and very wholesome. And two, leads them to some really interesting conclusions that are kind of redeeming for this work that has been like, just sort of unceremoniously shat upon for the last probably 5 years. I think the public opinion has kind of turned on like Harry Potter, and J.K. Rowling definitely hasn't helped, being like a crazy TERF and all kinds of weird shit. But like
she's got problems.
There's an issue or two in there. But I think that like them approaching it this way sort of takes a work that is generally from that critical lens sort of lambasted and in some cases perceived as sort of irredeemable, and turns it into something that can be what people already feel like it is. And that's like a really dope ass thing to do with literature, because like the critical side of literature is very about shitting on things. They're they're cynics and they're angry and they're chain smoking and they're drinking their scotch and they're just going to wander up to your favorite book and take a big old steamy dump on it, looking at you, deconstructionists at me. It's just,
wow, Rachel, no holds barred.
Look, I'm in a mood. But like, it's nice to see that sort of approached from the other direction, approached in a way that is like giving credit where credit is very definitely due, and creating more of it than it maybe has to begin with, because that piece is important to you and because it's special to you, and allowing yourself to love something despite the fact that it might have flaws or might have problems is so just like wholesome and good. It made my heart very happy.
Yeah, I really enjoyed it. I liked the interstitial music that they used.
Oh, yeah,
it seemed to fit
that.
really, really well. I really wish, like, I love podcasts. I'm doing one now partially because I love podcasts and I love my friends, but also I love podcasts.
Note that we're secondary, Aaron. I'm going to mark that down. Rachel will remember that.
But I have like 3 main podcasts I listen to, and that's like all I have time for. And so when I listen to a new podcast, which I do on occasion, it almost makes me sad, because kind of like what she was saying, when you make a choice, you have to eliminate like 100 other choices. Mm-hmm. And so like I listen to this, I'm like, man, I would love to listen to this. Would I love to listen to this as much as my three favorite podcasts? Now since we're like, I don't know where we are in actual time when you're hearing this, but we're currently in a, quarantine sort of situation. I've been able to listen to more podcasts, and I know I'm going to come out of this at some point and have to like eliminate stuff again, and it kind of makes me sad.
Yeah.
Yeah. That's definitely my favorite quote from Vanessa. And if you listen to this podcast, you'll hear her say it again. It's paraphrasing, but every minute I choose to do something is choosing not to do a million other things.
Yeah, picking one thing is the
Yeah.
exclusion of all other things. Like, I have that in my notes that hit me super hard.
Yeah. I didn't hear that this time around for some reason, but I wrote it down because I remembered it and it was the most impactful thing. And somehow I missed it and it was in this damn episode. So yeah, that is my favorite quote. And it just really resonates with me, not just in like my choice of media, but like, I want to play the piano really well. I want to do this piece really well, but I want to be able to paint. I want to do bead art. I want to remodel my house. Like, there's so many things that I want to do. And then I play WoW, I play Overwatch, and I'm on a podcast with my friends. There's things that are like, they're so enjoyable to me, and I don't think of them as wastes of time by any means, but I'm not doing all these other things I want to do as well.
Right. So it's like, it's a little bit about sitting down and saying like, okay, which of these things are like
Priorities.
valid and adding to my life in ways that I want to continue doing them. And like, there's nothing wrong with sitting down and playing WoW for 6 hours. I'm not going to,
Yeah.
I have a Path of Exile date scheduled later today. It's just a thing sometimes, but like knowing, okay, so I have to weigh the 6 hours of WoW versus like that painting that I really want to do, or like refinishing my kitchen cabinets. Like, I could get 2 cabinets done today instead of that 6 hours of WoW or whatever. Like making those valuations is not only hard to do in real time if you don't like sit down and reflect and really like think on it and put a lot of like time and cognition into it. It's also really hard if you have even a little bit of like any kind of cognitive weirdness, right?
Yeah.
So like any type of like anxiety or depression, or mine is ADHD, which causes a whole bunch of executive function issues that are problems all the time. But like any one of those things can take and sort of skew that math. So it makes it really hard to kind of like break yourself out of that stasis. So it's great advice. I struggle so much with the implementation of it, right? Like, it's not anything new. It's just that implementing that is so hyper hard.
There's a second quote. So that quote really resonates with me. And there's another quote, not by Vanessa or this group, but it's time that you spent, that you enjoyed, is not time wasted.
Right.
Yeah.
And you really have to weigh those two things. If you look back at your life and say like, oh, I didn't do anything with it, you're absolutely wrong. There's really not a wasted life if you enjoyed what you did.
Yeah.
But I also weigh that against every minute I choose to do something, I miss out on a million other things. Like, I want to embody both of those, but it's a balance.
Yeah.
For sure. And also a balance between like, okay, a lot of the million things that I want to do are like bigger or more social or whatever. And like balancing that with, you have to apply your own oxygen mask before you apply someone else's, right? Like, I absolutely want to devote a lot more of my time to like philanthropy and helping people. But also like, if I don't take the time to be a human being myself a little bit without like being racked with guilt, I will completely fall the fuck apart. And so like the people that I already work with, that will affect them and then their quality. So like you have to sort of balance those things a little bit too, where like, okay, sure. But also like I have to be emotionally healthy and well enough to be able to do those cool things I want to do without setting myself on fire unceremoniously in the street.
For sure.
Yeah, that balance of self-care is really important. You can't give yourself to the world fully unless you're at least giving something to yourself.
Right, exactly.
All right. I think that we have adequately discussed this podcast.
This was
Really
a weirdly philosophical episode for us. Also, I just want to say, like, the amount of depth that they get into in this episode was 27 minutes with ads. The amount of depth that they get into in that 27 minutes is like staggering to me. Their format is so tight. I say as somebody where our format is kind of loose.
Yeah, man. They've really
talk around things and bullshit for 35 minutes, and they're like, boom, under 30 minutes, we have completely expanded your worldview and made you lose your shit twice. So
I mean, I think they might do something radical, like talk about the episode before they do it. I mean, I don't know what kind of like crazy stuff they're thinking about.
Yeah, that's weird. That like pre-planning. I don't know about that. That sounds like a lot of work.
Yeah. I'm going to pull back the curtain a little bit, and they do mention this person called Ariana Nettleman, and
at the end there.
Yep, she becomes a much bigger player. She's kind of shy and doesn't like to talk a lot, but it is super clear later on that she does all the editing, and she has edited this. They spend hours in the studio. I don't know exactly how long per episode, but she edits it down to this, so she gets the really good stuff, and there's significant editing. So I don't want you to think that they just walked in start to finish, got everything right. She does a lot of work, and it's something you don't see on the end product.
I really appreciate
our current
you
Rachel,
parting that kimono a little bit. It makes me feel much better. Also, I cannot begin to express how comfortable and like appreciative, like truly deeply, not flattery, truly deeply appreciative I am of the fact that like my editing, it takes me probably an hour to edit an episode. You know, aside from Aaron's cat screaming, there's really not too much to edit out. So.
Why would you ever do that?
Yeah, I think that adds value.
I promise I will leave all future cat screaming in the episode. So that
what you do is you cut it and then you put it at the end as bloopers. That's exactly what you do.
In fact, I'm going to cut it and then save it all, and then you'll get a super cut of 2 hours of Aaron's cat screaming for like the 5th anniversary.
Our Patreon members.
It's a ringtone for Patreon members.
They get the Yowlcast, which is just your cat yowling. That's not true. Please do not message us. It's bad. It's very low quality. It's far away. The yowling is silly. And honestly, it doesn't happen too much during this podcast, for the most part.
Yeah.
Anyway, all that. Do we have a rating for this, Aaron? Do you have a way for us to rate this? Aside from
7 fires out of goblet.
Does it make the cut on your keeping it?
Yeah. Is this something that you would commit time to?
To the exclusion of another thing?
Yeah.
God, it's tough. It's really tough. I think, like, if I had free moments, I would just pick it up and listen to it. I don't even think, it doesn't seem that you have to read it in order or listen to it in order. I think you can take, helpful bits out of anything. So, like, I think I could come back to this if I have just like a little bit of free time. I could easily see myself doing that.
So this to me feels like comfort food in a lot of ways. It's very soothing, and again, it sort of fills that place that was left behind for me. Now that I am not in a like very sort of religiously minded environment all the time. Also, that 20-minute mark is like the sweet spot. Like 25 minutes is pretty much exactly the time of my commute. So I could see this becoming in like regular rotation on especially my drive home or like on rough days, sort of like giving a quick scroll through. Because I think you're right, Keegan, that like the continuity isn't necessarily critically important here.
I know what happened in Harry Potter.
Like, being like, oh, this one is about honesty. And I feel like I could really use that right now because I'm like conflicted on whether or not I tell this person about this thing or whatever, right? It's scrolling through and like picking one and then listening to that as sort of like just like a moment, right? Like a moment of reflection to sort of take to yourself, to sort of fill the same place that like church would if you were a churchgoer. I could absolutely see incorporating that into like my day-to-day existence. Honestly, going through 2 episodes on a Sunday morning would not be a bad use of my time at all. And like, it's a podcast, right? You put it on while you're doing groceries or driving to or from work or going to visit your mom or whatever. Like, there's
cleaning.
cleaning,
Yeah.
God, all the time, painting your dining room for the 15th time. All of those are like good times to sort of go through a lot of podcasting. The thing about this is a lot of the ones I listen to, I will like binge. So I sit down, well, stand on a ladder actually, to paint my dining room for the 15th time. And I'll listen to 5 episodes of a podcast. I don't think this holds up to that. I think that this is like a 1 or 2 episode max. And then it would start to feel, I think you start to lose some of the magic of it because it's just so much, right? It's the reason why church services
you want to
don't go more than an hour.
You want to take what they're saying and have it be powerful and meaningful. Right. And if you like get too many things to think about at the same time, so I go this tool and this tool and this tool, they're not gonna stay with you. They're not gonna stick with you. They're not gonna hit you quite right. You want to take the specific thing they're saying and be able to ingest that and make that sort of change in yourself until you can incorporate something new. I mean, obviously you listened to this first episode and got like a really good idea for your job. Mm-hmm. So like I think taking it piecemeal might actually be a much better way to experience this particular medium.
Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. Well, thanks for listening, guys. I really appreciate it. And I'm happy that it sparked such a discussion. And next episode is Rachel. Are you going to give us a sneak peek?
Yeah. So we're going to try and get the tech on a game called Donut County to work. I think the plan right now is that I'm going to play it and then Twitch stream it to you guys. I'm going to try and archive that stream so that if you are really interested in hearing our bullshit while I play Donut County.
Why did you do that? Oh, you're dead now.
It's available in the future. I don't want to give too much away, but I doubt that sentence will come up. Anyway, Donut County will be a completely different experience. It's going to be not as crunchy as I kind of feel like a fucking plebe for bringing Donut County after you brought me this fucking art that I can digest for 20 minutes. It's not going to be like that at all, but hopefully we will have a very good time.
All right. Thanks everyone. And we'll see you again later.
Bye.
Bye.